Hi, I'm Tom Zimmerman from the EMDR podcast. This episode is about clients that struggle to find an individual memory when, in the context of complex trauma, trauma was repeated, it was daily, it was not exceptional, and some strategies for getting at individual isolated memories. Some clients have trouble finding individual isolated memories because of the vast sea of related memories. It's like asking them to find an individual molecule of water when all they can see is the ocean. But the problem is that EMDR at its best is memory-centered. Um, the adaptive information processing model is memory and experience centered. Some consultants say that when a client can't access an individual memory, you can always work on the body sensation channel when working with aggregated memories. But I think that if you can find a memory and a representative one, then that's probably the best way to work. And if we think about it, in virtually every trauma therapy that is transformative, what we're doing is making an individual traumatic memory a more normal memory with the benefits of generalization that can come from that process. So there are many reasons why clients may struggle finding an individual memory, and I'm talking about a specific subcategory of that. Some clients will struggle to find an individual memory because a lot of memory has become dissociated. There are many ways and reasons why this might happen, and there are good strategies for working with dissociated memory that we'll talk about in other podcasts. What I'm talking about in this episode is trouble isolating a specific memory because they all merge. So pulling on one string causes a huge barbed mess to come. Um, but really, in a lot of ways, I think the problem isolating individual memories really does come from not deeply understanding the depth and the complexity of memory. So with many people with complex trauma, their trauma is encyclopedic, right? And if we're not specific enough, we may only get the chapter, we may only get the volume. And what we're looking for is a particular paragraph in an encyclopedia. Um, so trauma is also um, topographic, right? So trauma is spatial, if you know what I mean by that. Trauma occurs in context, and those contexts are encoded in the traumatic memory. So with complex trauma, the information stored in our limbic brain is truly immense. And it may be the difference between a library. If you imagine someone who is not pervasively traumatized, but yet has had some trauma, they may have a library of traumatic memories that consists of 50 books, whereas a pervasively traumatized client may have a library that consists of 150,000 books. So how we get at those individual books has to matter, right? So, and again, I guess in a lot of ways, what we're talking about as a subset of target selection is how do we get at a specific individual memory that is going to be both constructive, productive, right, and also representative. So some training programs do take a 10 worst, 10 best, meaning, go ahead, tell me the 10 worst things that's ever happened to you, and somehow to offset that, I'm going to have you tell me 10 of the best things that's ever happened to you. Um, I don't even know what to say about that. This is simply not advisable with complex trauma. And it's really not trauma informed. And if I need to explain why, that's a little bit longer of a conversation. And that may connect more to what it means to be a decent human being rather than memory selection. So that's a whole other thing. We can talk about it later. If your best intuition for target selection is 10 worst, 10 best with your clients with complex trauma, um, come on in. Come on in. There are way, way better ways of doing it. The Institute for Creative Mindfulness that trained me and who I provide consultation through and trainings through have what I think is probably one of the most sensitive approaches out there. So we kind of have, presenting issue, theme, negative cognition, sometimes multiple negative cognitions under that theme, and underneath that, each negative cognition, first, worst, most recent. So we really do take a theme approach. But there's sometimes when even that theme approach doesn't really get you there. And when it doesn't, you have lots of other options. Among those options are kind of just general float backs from recent triggering events. Sometimes that can get you there. You get there, you load up that body sensation, kind of do affect scan and search on that memory, the way that memory sits in the body, and that can get you somewhere productive. One of those options is to make the search terms more specific and bring in landscape to help with that. So if you don't know what I mean, if we Google, in quotes, pizza in Ohio, that returns 413,000 Google matches, okay? If we Google pizza in Little Italy in Cleveland, that narrows it a lot, okay? But if we Google pizza, Murray Hill Road, Cleveland, that gets us to one restaurant that is open and one that didn't survive COVID, okay? And you see what we just did in that metaphor of the Google search, right? We were searching too broadly, and then we narrow it, and one of the ways we might narrow it is by using landscape, topography, okay? So suppose the client has identified self-esteem. So we're kind of talking, treatment planning. Self-esteem is a presenting issue. And then we work with the client and we kind of narrow that down to the negative cognition of what I want doesn't matter. Okay? Now we may do a standard float back. Can you think of an earlier time when what I want doesn't matter was true? And the client may say every time, right? Nothing stands out, because that negative belief was not exceptional, right? It just formed the core reality of the client's existence. So one of the things we may do is we may narrow it by asking these questions, okay? From the perspective of what I want doesn't matter, what age does your gut tell you right now that we might need to work, okay? What age? Don't overthink it. Just kind of check your gut. What I want doesn't matter. What age might be productive to work today? Okay, 8 years old. Okay, what I want doesn't matter. At 8 years old, where do we need to work? Do we need to work at home, at school, or in the community? Okay, so what I want doesn't matter. 8 years old, and the client says home. Okay, and I'm saying think about for a minute the layout of your house when you were 8 years old. You were about in third grade then. So think about the layout of the house, okay? And again, think about this. In every square foot of a childhood home, there are memories connected with trauma when a client has complex trauma. So, okay, home, from that negative belief, what I want doesn't matter, 8 years old, at home, what room do we need to be in? What room does your gut tell you we need to be in? The kitchen, okay? Where in the kitchen? The kitchen table, okay? What chair at the kitchen table? Okay? Client says, I've got it. Good, okay? So from the standpoint of what I want doesn't matter, at 8 years old, in that chair, in that kitchen, look around and let me know the first memory that comes. Okay? And 95 out of 100 times that I do this, give the client a few moments, and what they're going to say is some version of, I've got it. Okay? And what I find is that that memory, using this approach, right, of narrowing, using age, using space, using topography, right, using particular places in the landscape, That approach tends to get you to a memory that tends to be a little bit representative of that particular negative cognition in that developmental era. By which I mean, because we floated that back from more recent times, by which I mean that it tends to be productive related to the current presenting issue of self-esteem and what's been coming up related to that recently. Okay, so let's do this using another scenario. Okay, so what I want doesn't matter. Okay, what age do we need to work? What age does your gut tell you we need to work? 13. Okay, from what I want doesn't matter. At 13 years old, where do we need to work? At home, in the school, or community? Okay, school. Okay, good. Get a floor plan of the school in your mind. Okay, good. You got it? Good. Where in the school do you need to work? Okay, the band room. Okay, so from what I want doesn't matter. At 13 years old, where in the band room do we need to work? Okay, in the back right corner. Okay, good. So look around the band room from 13 years old in the back right corner and let me know the first memory that comes. Very, very often, boom. What comes is a representative memory that's directly related and connected to the very territories where we most need to be and we most need to work. So I think a lot of times what's happening is that, long story short, our search terms are way too broad. We need to, when what we have is, when memory is global, in order to get to an individual house, we have to zoom in more. If our perspective is 50 miles away, because everything feels the same, in order to get to an individual house, we may need to zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. And very, very often, we can find a memory that is representative enough that when the client can work on it and can clear it, it can generalize pretty broadly. So long story short, there are really good ways, and this is just one. There are dozens and dozens of ways to get at memories when our typical common approaches to finding memories that may be productive, may be representative, are bringing whole bookshelves of things rather than individual isolated autobiographical memories. So long story short, sometimes we just need to dig. We need to be a little more specific in our search terms. We need to leverage developmental eras, space, topography, and very, very often you put the client in a very specific context and a very specific memory will come. So give that a shot and let me know how it goes. Thank you. Thank you for going on this little part of the journey with me. Thank you for all the good work that you do with your clients, and thank you for all the good work that you do in the world.